In 1988, at the height of his worldwide fame, Michael Jackson made one of the most significant purchases of his life. He acquired a sprawling ranch in California's Santa Ynez Valley, covering nearly 2,700 acres of rolling hills, ancient oak trees, and open countryside. To most people, it was already an extraordinary property, but to Michael, it was only the beginning. He wasn't looking for another luxurious mansion. He wanted to create a place unlike anything that had ever existed, a private world where reality gave way to imagination. Soon after purchasing the estate, construction crews began transforming the ranch. What had once been quiet farmland slowly evolved into something extraordinary. Michael wasn't interested in making small improvements. He envisioned an experience, inspired by storybooks, amusement parks, and the sense of wonder he remembered from childhood fantasies. Every corner of the property was redesigned with a purpose. A narrow-gauge railroad was built to wind its way across the estate, complete with stations, bridges, and a steam-powered train. It allowed visitors to travel through the ranch as if they were entering another world. Nearby, a colorful carousel became one of Neverland's most recognizable landmarks. Before long, additional attractions appeared. There was a Ferris wheel, a pirate ship ride, bumper cars, an arcade filled with games, a movie theater equipped with the latest technology, beautiful gardens, lakes, fountains, and walking paths surrounded by towering trees. It looked less like a private residence, and more like a theme park hidden behind locked gates. But perhaps the most unforgettable feature was the collection of animals. Michael had always loved wildlife. Over time, Neverland became home to elephants, giraffes, zebras, flamingos, and a variety of exotic birds. There were also tigers and other rare animals that fascinated visitors from around the world. For many children invited to the ranch, seeing these animals up close became an unforgettable experience. Creating a place like this required extraordinary resources. Every attraction demanded constant maintenance. The animals required professional care. The gardens needed full-time staff. Security teams protected the property around the clock. Dozens of employees worked every day to keep Neverland operating exactly as Michael imagined. The cost was enormous. Millions of dollars were invested in building the ranch, and millions more would be spent maintaining it in the years that followed. But for Michael, the expense wasn't the priority. His goal wasn't to own the most expensive home in California. It was to build a place where happiness could exist without limits, where children facing illness or hardship could forget their struggles, even if only for a single day, where laughter mattered more than luxury. For a while, that vision became reality. Neverland grew into one of the most famous private estates in the world. Celebrities visited. Children from hospitals and charities were invited to spend unforgettable days there. The ranch became almost mythical, a place that seemed too magical to be real. Yet as Neverland's reputation spread across the globe, so did the intense public attention surrounding its owner. And before long, the dream Michael had worked so hard to create would become the center of a storm that neither he nor the ranch could ever escape. As Neverland Ranch continued to grow, it became far more than Michael Jackson's home. It evolved into a place unlike any other private estate in the world. From the outside, most people only caught occasional glimpses through magazine photographs or television reports, but those who were invited beyond the gates often described the experience as unforgettable. The moment visitors entered the property, it became clear they were stepping into a world designed to spark imagination. A miniature train slowly wound through the landscape, passing lakes, gardens, and tree-lined paths before stopping at stations built to resemble those from another era. Music could often be heard playing softly throughout the ranch, adding to the feeling that reality had been left behind. Every detail reflected Michael's personal vision. The grounds were carefully landscaped. Colorful flowers surrounded walkways. Fountains and sculptures appeared around unexpected corners. Even ordinary buildings were designed to feel warm, welcoming, and full of character. At the center of the property stood Michael's residence. Unlike the amusement rides and attractions, the house itself offered privacy. It was where he could escape cameras, crowded arenas, and the constant attention that followed him everywhere else. Although lavish by any standard, the home was also filled with personal collections that reflected his lifelong curiosity. Books lined the shelves, artwork decorated the walls, movie memorabilia, antique furniture, and countless objects collected from around the world filled its rooms. Every item seemed to tell part of a larger story. Neverland also welcomed thousands of guests over the years. Many were children facing serious illnesses, working with charitable organizations. Michael regularly invited families to spend time at the ranch free of charge. They experienced the rides, visited the animals, watched movies, shared meals, and enjoyed a day far removed from hospitals and medical treatments. For those families, Neverland wasn't simply a celebrity's home. It became a place associated with hope and unforgettable memories. Celebrities, world leaders, athletes, and entertainers also visited the property. Some came out of friendship, others were simply curious to see the estate everyone was talking about. Few private homes attracted that level of worldwide fascination. The ranch quickly became part of Michael Jackson's public identity. Just as audiences connected Elvis Presley with Graceland, people began connecting Michael with Neverland. The property became a symbol of his creativity, his generosity, and his lifelong desire to preserve the wonder of childhood. But fame always carries a price. As Neverland became more famous, it also attracted increasing attention from the media. Reporters wanted photographs, television crews gathered outside the gates, helicopters occasionally flew overhead. Curiosity about Michael's private life continued growing. The sanctuary he had built to escape the outside world was slowly becoming one of the most closely watched places in America, and before long, the peaceful ranch that had once represented happiness and imagination would become the center of one of the most controversial chapters of Michael Jackson's life, a chapter that would change Neverland forever. For years, Neverland Ranch represented everything Michael Jackson hoped it would become. It was a place where children laughed freely, families escaped everyday life, and visitors experienced a world that seemed untouched by reality. The ranch became one of the most recognizable private estates in America. Its gates welcomed thousands of guests. Charitable organizations brought seriously ill children to spend unforgettable days there. Celebrities visited. Friends returned again and again. For a time, Neverland appeared to be the physical expression of Michael's lifelong dream. But in the early 1990s, that dream was suddenly overshadowed by controversy. Allegations involving Michael Jackson began dominating headlines around the world. Almost overnight, the conversation surrounding Neverland changed. News helicopters circled above the property, television crews gathered outside its gates, reporters from around the world arrived in California. The ranch that had once symbolized joy and imagination now became the focus of constant media attention. Every photograph, every visitor, every event that took place at Neverland became the subject of public discussion. Then came one of the most dramatic moments in the ranch's history. In 1993, law enforcement officers executed a search of Neverland Ranch as part of an official investigation. The property was examined extensively. Buildings were searched, items were documented for days. Images of investigators entering and leaving the estate dominated television broadcasts across the globe. The investigation transformed Neverland into more than just Michael Jackson's home. It became one of the most recognizable locations in one of the most closely followed celebrity stories in modern history. Although the legal proceedings eventually came to an end, the public perception of Neverland had changed forever. The ranch was no longer viewed only as a place of wonder. For many people, its name had become permanently linked to controversy. Michael himself often spoke about how deeply those events affected him. According to people close to him, he believed the privacy and sense of safety he had once found there had disappeared. The sanctuary he had spent years creating no longer felt like an escape. Instead, it became a reminder of one of the most painful periods of his life. Even though Neverland remained standing, something had fundamentally changed. The carefree atmosphere that once defined the property became increasingly difficult to restore. Public tours were never part of Michael's vision, yet the ranch had become famous for reasons he never intended. As the years passed, the number of visitors declined. The celebrations became less frequent. The laughter that had once echoed across the grounds slowly faded. And while the outside world continued debating Michael Jackson's legacy, another challenge was quietly growing behind the scenes: the extraordinary cost of maintaining Neverland. Because building a dream was one thing, keeping it alive would soon become a financial burden unlike anything Michael had ever faced. By the early 2000s, Neverland Ranch was still one of the most recognizable private estates in the world. Its train tracks still stretched across the hills. The carousel still stood waiting. The gardens remained beautifully maintained. From the outside, very little appeared to have changed. But behind the gates, a different reality was unfolding. The enormous cost of maintaining Neverland had become increasingly difficult to sustain. Operating a property of that size required an extraordinary amount of money. There were full-time groundskeepers, animal caretakers, maintenance crews, security personnel, administrative staff, and specialists responsible for preserving every attraction across the estate. The bills never stopped arriving, even when Michael wasn't living at the ranch full-time. The expenses continued. Every month demanded substantial resources simply to keep Neverland functioning. At the same time, Michael was facing growing financial pressure in other parts of his life. Years of lavish spending, major business obligations, legal expenses, and large loans had begun taking a serious toll. Much of his wealth remained tied to valuable assets rather than available cash. On paper, he still possessed extraordinary wealth, But maintaining that lifestyle required constant financial support. Eventually, the strain became impossible to ignore. Reports emerged that loans connected to the ranch and other properties were becoming increasingly difficult to manage. Creditors began seeking repayment. Financial negotiations grew more urgent. For the first time, the future of Neverland itself appeared uncertain. Then came another heartbreaking decision. Michael gradually distanced himself from the ranch he had spent years creating, according to those close to him. He no longer viewed Neverland as the peaceful refuge it had once been. The memories attached to the property had changed. Instead of representing freedom, it reminded him of years filled with intense public scrutiny and personal hardship. The place that had once brought him comfort now carried painful associations. As financial pressures continued mounting, maintenance at the ranch became more difficult. Some attractions stopped operating. The atmosphere that had once felt vibrant slowly grew quieter, without regular activity. Neverland began losing the energy that had once made it feel alive. Then came one of the most difficult moments in the property's history. Financial institutions moved toward foreclosure proceedings connected to debts involving the ranch. For a time, it appeared possible that Michael Jackson could lose Neverland entirely. The estate that had symbolized imagination for nearly 2 decades stood on the edge of disappearing from his life forever. Although business agreements eventually helped prevent an immediate loss, the reality had become painfully clear. The dream Michael had invested so much of himself in could no longer be sustained in the way he had envisioned. Neverland had become more than an emotional burden. It had become a financial one, and while the ranch remained standing, its future was now uncertain. No one knew who, if anyone, would eventually take ownership of one of the most famous private properties in the world. The answer wouldn't come until years later, long after Michael Jackson himself was gone. For nearly 2 decades, Neverland Ranch had been inseparable from Michael Jackson's identity. Whenever people spoke about the King of Pop, images of the famous gates, the miniature railroad, and the amusement rides were never far behind. The ranch had become almost as recognizable as Michael himself. But by the mid-2000s, that chapter of his life was quietly coming to an end. Although Neverland remained his property, Michael gradually stopped living there. The place that had once represented comfort and escape no longer felt the same. According to people who knew him, he believed the ranch had lost the peace it once offered. Years of intense media attention and legal investigations had changed how he looked at the estate. The sanctuary he had created to escape the outside world had become one of the most photographed and discussed places in America. Leaving Neverland wasn't simply a change of address. It marked the end of a dream. Instead of returning to the ranch, Michael spent much of his remaining years living in different locations, including Bahrain, Ireland, Las Vegas, and eventually Los Angeles. His life became far more private, far more mobile. The permanent home he had once imagined no longer existed. Meanwhile, Neverland remained largely empty. The attractions that had once been filled with laughter became silent. The train no longer carried excited children through the property. Many of the animals were relocated. The amusement rides stopped operating without regular visitors. The ranch slowly lost the vibrant atmosphere that had once made it feel magical. Employees continued maintaining portions of the estate. Security remained in place. The buildings were preserved as well as possible, but everyone understood that something important had changed. Neverland was no longer the living dream it had once been. It had become a memory. Then, on June 25th, 2009, everything changed forever. Michael Jackson passed away before he ever returned to live at the ranch. The home he had built with so much imagination would never again welcome its creator. Almost immediately, fans from around the world began gathering near the entrance. Flowers covered the gates. Handwritten letters, photographs, candles, messages of love and remembrance appeared day after day. For many admirers, Neverland had become more than a private residence. It had become a symbol of Michael himself. People hoped the property might one day become a museum or memorial where future generations could celebrate his life and career. Others believed it should remain exactly as he had left it, protected from public access. But while fans debated its future, a far more practical question remained unanswered. Who would maintain such an enormous estate? The property still required significant financial resources. Thousands of acres had to be cared for. Buildings needed constant upkeep. Security expenses continued. And without Michael living there, Neverland had become one of the most expensive empty homes in America. Before long, the estate faced a difficult decision. If Neverland was going to survive, someone new would eventually have to take ownership. But finding a buyer for one of the most famous and most controversial properties in the world would prove far more difficult than anyone expected. After Michael Jackson's death, Neverland Ranch entered a new chapter. For the first time since it had become one of the world's most famous private estates, it stood without its creator. The laughter had disappeared, the music had faded, and the gates that once welcomed thousands of visitors remained closed, although the property still possessed breathtaking beauty. Its future was uncertain. The estate responsible for Michael Jackson's assets faced an enormous challenge. Maintaining Neverland continued to cost millions of dollars. Thousands of acres required constant care. Roads, buildings, and gardens demanded regular maintenance. Security teams remained on site every day. Even an empty estate of that size generated significant expenses. Keeping Neverland exactly as it had been simply wasn't practical forever. Eventually, the difficult decision was made. The property would be offered for sale. At first, many believed buyers would compete for the opportunity. After all, this wasn't just another luxury ranch. It was one of the most recognizable private homes on Earth. Its name alone was known across every continent, but reality proved far more complicated. The asking price reflected the property's extraordinary size and history. Potential buyers admired the estate, yet many hesitated. Some questioned the enormous cost of maintaining it. Others worried about the constant public attention that would come with owning such a famous property. No matter how beautiful the ranch remained, its history could never be separated from its identity. For years, Neverland stayed on the market. The price was reduced. Marketing campaigns highlighted its natural beauty, luxurious buildings, and breathtaking landscape. Photographs showcased rolling hills, peaceful lakes, ancient oak trees, and elegant architecture. The famous amusement rides had largely been removed, allowing the estate to appear more like a traditional luxury ranch than a private theme park. Even so, the property remained unsold. Many buyers simply couldn't imagine living in a place so closely connected to one of the most recognizable figures in modern history. Others believed the ranch would always attract media attention. Privacy, one of the main reasons people purchase estates of this size, would never truly exist at Neverland. The longer the ranch remained unsold, the more symbolic it became. It represented more than real estate. It represented an era that had come to an end, a place once filled with imagination, now waiting quietly for a new purpose, for fans. Watching Neverland sit empty was heartbreaking. Many hoped someone would preserve it. Others dreamed it might become a museum celebrating Michael Jackson's life and career. But year after year, the gates remained closed, the future remained uncertain. Then, nearly a decade after Michael Jackson's passing, a surprising buyer finally stepped forward, not a corporation, not a museum, but a billionaire businessman with a vision of his own. His purchase would close one chapter of Neverland's remarkable story while opening another. For years, your Neverland ranch waited. The gates remained closed. The attractions that had once filled the property with excitement had disappeared. The famous train no longer carried passengers. The carnival rides were gone. Only the rolling hills, towering oak trees, peaceful lakes, and elegant buildings remained. It was still one of California's most remarkable estates, but finding someone willing to purchase it proved far more difficult than anyone expected. Its history was impossible to ignore. Every potential buyer understood they weren't simply purchasing thousands of acres of land. They were buying one of the most recognizable properties in the world. For some, that history was too overwhelming. For others, the constant public attention was enough to walk away. As the years passed, the asking price was reduced more than once. The estate was carefully marketed as a luxury ranch rather than as Michael Jackson's former home. Real estate experts emphasized its natural beauty, its privacy, its vineyards, its spacious residences, and its breathtaking location in California's Santa Ynez Valley. Still, the search continued. Then, more than a decade after Michael Jackson first transformed the property into Neverland, a buyer finally emerged. In late 2020, billionaire investor Ron Burkle purchased the estate. The reported sale price was approximately $22 million, far below the amount the property had once been listed for. Many people were surprised. How could one of the most famous private estates on Earth sell for such a dramatically reduced price? Real estate experts pointed to several reasons. The ranch required substantial ongoing maintenance. Its size alone made ownership expensive. And perhaps most importantly, its extraordinary history limited the number of people interested in owning it. Burkle's connection to the property also attracted attention. He had known Michael Jackson personally for many years. According to public reports, his decision to purchase the ranch was based primarily on its value as a private estate and investment opportunity. The property itself had already changed significantly. Many of the amusement attractions that once defined Neverland had been removed long before the sale. Without the Ferris wheel, without the carousel, without the train operating through the landscape, and the ranch looked very different from the place millions remembered. It had gradually returned to something closer to a traditional California estate, yet despite those changes, its identity remained unmistakable. To fans around the world, it would always be Neverland, the home where Michael Jackson had tried to create a world filled with imagination and happiness. Burkle largely kept the property out of the public eye. Unlike many famous estates, Neverland did not become a tourist destination. It remained private, quiet, hidden once again behind its gates. In many ways, that privacy reflected something Michael himself had always wanted, a peaceful place removed from constant attention. Although ownership had changed, the emotional connection millions of fans felt toward Neverland never disappeared. Because for them, the ranch was never just another piece of real estate. It was part of Michael Jackson's story. And stories like that never truly belong to a single owner. Neverland Ranch is very different from the place the world remembers. The crowds are gone, the laughter has faded, and the attractions that once made the property feel like a private amusement park no longer exist. What remains is something quieter, more peaceful, and in many ways, closer to the landscape Michael Jackson first saw when he purchased the ranch decades ago. The estate still stretches across nearly 2,700 acres of California countryside. Rolling hills rise in every direction. Ancient oak trees continue to shade the winding roads. Lakes reflect the changing skies, and the mountain views remain just as breathtaking as they were when Michael first imagined building his dream there. Many of the ranch's original buildings have been carefully preserved. The main residence still stands, so do the guest houses, the gardens, the barns, and the private roads connecting different parts of the estate. Everything is maintained with remarkable care. Yet anyone who visited Neverland during Michael's lifetime would immediately notice what is missing. The Ferris wheel is gone. The carousel no longer turns. The miniature railroad no longer carries passengers across the property. The amusement rides that once defined Neverland have disappeared. Even many of the exotic animals that once fascinated visitors were relocated years ago. Without those familiar attractions, the ranch feels less like a fantasy world, and more like an elegant country estate surrounded by extraordinary natural beauty. Despite these changes, Neverland continues to attract worldwide attention. Fans regularly travel to the area, hoping to catch even a distant glimpse of the famous gates. Photographs of the entrance continue circulating online. Documentaries revisit the property, and discussions about its history remain as active today as they were years ago. Although the ranch itself remains private, its place in popular culture has never faded. For millions of people, Neverland represents much more than land and buildings. It represents a dream, a place created by an artist who believed imagination deserved its own home. For others, the ranch reflects the complicated reality of Michael Jackson's life, a story filled with extraordinary success, extraordinary generosity, and extraordinary controversy. Both perspectives now exist side by side, because history rarely tells only one story. Time has transformed Neverland in unexpected ways. The physical attractions may be gone, but its symbolic power remains remarkably strong. Very few private homes have ever become so deeply connected to a single individual. Even fewer continue inspiring curiosity decades after they were built. Today, the ranch stands quietly behind its gates, protected from the crowds, far removed from the excitement that once surrounded it, yet somehow, Neverland still captures the world's imagination, not because of what remains inside the property, but because of the memories attached to it. And perhaps that has always been Neverland's greatest legacy, not the rides, not the buildings, but the emotions it continues to evoke long after the music stopped. Years have passed since Michael Jackson last called Neverland home. The music still plays, the records continue selling, new generations continue discovering the artist who transformed popular music forever. Yet for many people, one image remains inseparable from his legacy: the gates of Neverland. It is remarkable to think that what began as one man's deeply personal dream became one of the most recognizable private properties in modern history. Neverland was never intended to be just another celebrity mansion. It wasn't built to compete with Hollywood's grandest estates, or to demonstrate wealth. For Michael, it represented something much more meaningful. It was his attempt to create a place where imagination could exist without limits, a place where children could laugh, where families could forget life's struggles, and where happiness mattered more than fame. For years, that vision became a reality. Thousands of children visited the ranch through charitable organizations. Families facing unimaginable hardships found moments of joy there. Friends described the property as unlike anywhere they had ever experienced. To them, Neverland wasn't defined by luxury. It was defined by the feeling it created. Of course, history also remembers another side of the story: the controversies, the investigations, the endless media attention. Those events permanently changed how many people viewed the ranch. Its legacy became as complicated as the life of the man who built it. For some, Neverland symbolizes generosity and imagination. For others, It represents one of the most debated chapters in entertainment history. Both perspectives have become part of its story. Because history rarely offers simple answers, it preserves every chapter, the joyful moments, the painful moments, and everything in between. Today, the property remains private. Its attractions are gone, its gates rarely open. Life inside the ranch is quiet once again. Yet the name Neverland continues to carry extraordinary meaning around the world. Few places have become so deeply connected to a single individual. Mention Graceland, and people think of Elvis Presley. Mention Paisley Park, and they remember Prince. Mention Neverland, and almost instantly, the image of Michael Jackson comes to mind. That connection has survived changing owners, changing landscapes, and the passing of time itself. Perhaps that is because Neverland was never truly about buildings or amusement rides. It was about an idea, the belief that wonder should never disappear, that childhood deserves to be protected, and that imagination can survive even in a world filled with pressure and responsibility. Whether people admire Michael Jackson, question parts of his life, or simply appreciate his extraordinary influence on music, few would deny the lasting impact he left on popular culture. His songs continue inspiring artists, his performances remain studied by dancers and entertainers around the globe, his creativity still shapes music videos, stage productions, and live performances decades after they were first created. Neverland became an extension of that same creativity, not because it was perfect, but because it reflected the mind of the person who imagined it. In the end, the ranch tells a story far greater than architecture or real estate. It tells the story of a man who spent his entire life searching for something many people experience without ever realizing its value. A place to belong, a place to feel safe, a place where happiness could last forever. Perhaps no physical place can truly provide that. But for a time, Neverland came remarkably close. And even though the rides have stopped, the gates remain closed, and the dream has changed with time. Its story continues because some places are remembered not for what they are, but for what they represent, and Neverland will always represent one of the most extraordinary dreams ever built.